A left-handed man, a hidden sword, and 18 years of oppression about to end with a single blow. This is the story of EHUD, the left-handed deliverer whom God used when Israel had lost all hope. A man whom no one took seriously, but who carried with him the most audacious plan you can imagine: to enter alone into the palace of the most cruel king in the region and change the destiny of an entire nation. While Israel suffocated under Moab's brutal rule, paying humiliating tributes and watching its identity disappear, the people cried out for a miracle, and God answered by raising up precisely the one no one expected, an ordinary man with a characteristic that many considered a weakness. He was left-handed, but what seemed to be a limitation became the perfect weapon in God's hands. You will discover how EHUD planned every detail, how he deceived the palace guards, and how a single moment of courage freed Israel from nearly 2 decades of suffering. And in the end, I will reveal something about this story that few realize, a powerful biblical truth about how God transforms our weaknesses into impossible victories. Stay until the end, because what you're about to discover could change your life. Imagine waking up every day knowing that you are not free, that everything you work for, everything you build, can be taken away at any moment. That was the reality for Israel in Judges chapter 3. For 18 long years, God's people lived under the crushing weight of Moab. It wasn't just taxes, it was daily humiliation. Moabite soldiers entered homes, took what they wanted, and the Israelites could do nothing but bow their heads. The pride of being the chosen people had turned to shame. The memory of past victories seemed distant, almost unreal. The children grew up without knowing what freedom was. The elders told stories of better times, but their voices sounded weak, defeated. Each harvest meant handing over the best part to King Eglon. Every celebration was interrupted by the reminder that they did not own their own land. Israel was dying inside, not by the sword, but by resignation. And the question that echoed in the heart of every Israelite was always the same: has God abandoned us? The silence of the heavens seemed to confirm the worst. No prophet arose, no leader appeared. Only the heavy sound of tribute being dragged to Moab, month after month, year after year. But what they didn't know is that God never abandons his people. And when oppression reaches its limit, when hope seems to have died completely, that's exactly when God acts. Only this time, he wouldn't choose who everyone expected. Eglon was not only powerful, he was arrogant. The king of Moab had made domination over Israel as natural as the sunrise. To him, that defeated people was nothing more than an endless source of riches. Seated on his throne, surrounded by heavily armed guards, Eglon laughed as he received the tributes. Gold, silver, grain, cattle, everything went into his coffers. He had grown fat on the prosperity stolen from Israel. His palace shone with luxuries bought with the sweat of an enslaved people, and he saw no reason for that to change. After all, who would dare challenge him? The throne room was filled with symbols of his conquest. War trophies adorned the walls. The scent of expensive incense filled the air. Servants moved in absolute silence, afraid of angering the king. Every step toward Eglon was calculated. Every word spoken in his presence needed to be carefully chosen. He tolerated no disrespect. And Israel, humiliated, knew this better than anyone. The Israelites who came to bring tribute entered with their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact with the king. It was a ritual of submission that was constantly repeated. Eglon liked it. He liked to see the people who were once called God's chosen people groveling before him. For the king of Moab, Israel was just another conquest, another trophy in his collection. But Eglon made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the God of Israel. He believed his strength was sufficient. He thought that his dominion would last forever. And while he sank into his own arrogance, God was already preparing the man who would destroy everything Eglon had built. Eglon didn't know it, but his days of glory were numbered, and the blow would come from where he least expected it. In the midst of all that despair, there was a man named EHUD, son of Gera, of the tribe of Benjamin. To most people, he was just another Israelite trying to survive under the oppression of Moab. Nothing about him stood out. Nothing about him screamed hero. Ehud was left-handed, and in that culture, that wasn't seen as a positive thing. Most people used their right hand for everything, especially for fighting. Being left-handed meant being different, and different was often synonymous with weak, inadequate. But God never sees things the way men see them. While Israel searched for a strong warrior, someone with military experience, a charismatic leader who could ignite crowds, God looked to Ehud, a discreet man, a man who knew how to observe, calculate, and wait for the right moment. A man who didn't draw attention, and precisely for that reason, he could do what no one else could. Ehud was not impulsive. He wouldn't go around shouting challenges at Eglon in the middle of the square. He was intelligent, strategic, and God was shaping something much greater in him than a simple rebellion. He was preparing a plan so precise, so bold, that it would change the course of Israel's history. Because God doesn't need perfection, He doesn't need obvious heroes. He uses those who are willing, who trust, who are ready to take a step even when everything seems impossible. And Ehud was about to prove that what men consider weakness, God transforms into victory. Ehud knew something that no one else realized. He had been chosen, not by chance, not by luck, but by God. And that certainty changed everything. While the Israelites wondered when someone would finally do something, Ehud was already acting. He observed, he studied the patterns. He knew the movements of the Moabite guards. He knew how the tribute system worked. He understood the routine of Eglon's palace. Every detail mattered. Every piece of information would be used at the right time. He wasn't a warrior trained on battlefields, but he had something many warriors lack: strategic vision. He knew that brute force wouldn't defeat Moab. It required intelligence, it required courage mixed with patience, and above all, it required trusting that God was guiding his every step. Ehud wasn't trying to be a hero, he was answering a calling, and that makes all the difference. When you act because you've been called by God, the fear doesn't disappear, but you act anyway. The insecurity doesn't go away, but you move forward. Because it's not about you, it's about a purpose that is greater than any human limitation. And since we're talking about purpose, if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next Bible stories that can transform your life. Ehud was about to do something no one had ever attempted before. And it would all begin with a seemingly simple mission: to bring tribute to King Eglon. But what appeared to be a common task would conceal the most audacious plan Israel had ever seen. Ehud had a plan, and that plan began with the creation of a weapon. He forged a sword, but it wasn't an ordinary sword. It was short, sharp, and double-edged. It was the perfect size to be hidden under his clothes without raising suspicion. And here's the brilliant detail. He tied it to his right side, not his left, like everyone else did. Because Ehud was left-handed, and that meant that the guards, accustomed to searching people's left side for weapons, would never imagine that the sword would be on the other side. What everyone saw as a limitation now became the key to the whole plan. God uses precisely what the world despises. Ehud was chosen to deliver the tribute to King Eglon, a task that many Israelites hated, but which he accepted without hesitation. Because he knew that this was not just a tax delivery, it was God's mission to liberate his people. And he was ready. The days leading up to the journey must have been intense. Ehud knew he might not return alive. He knew that one mistake, one wrong move, one poorly chosen word, and all would be lost. But he did not back down. He prepared himself mentally and spiritually. He trusted that God would be with him every second of that impossible mission. When the day finally came to leave, Ehud carried with him much more than tribute. He carried the hope of an entire nation, and beneath his clothes, hidden on his right side, was the tool God would use to break Israel's chains. What happened next would change everything. Ehud arrived at Eglon's palace with the tribute. He was calm, composed, showing no nervousness. Just another Israelite fulfilling his duty of delivering the riches taken from his people. The guards looked at him with disdain. To them, Ehud was nothing more than another defeated subject. They conducted the usual search, checking the left side of his body, where people normally carried weapons. They found nothing. How could they? The sword was exactly where they weren't looking. Ehud was led into the king's presence. Eglon was in his summer room, a cool and private place where he usually relaxed. The king, confident in his safety, saw no threat whatsoever in this common man before him. He received the tribute with the indifference of one accustomed to having everything. After delivering what he had brought, Ehud left with the other messengers. But he didn't go far. Near the palace, he said goodbye to his companions and returned alone. He had something important to do. He returned and requested a private audience with Eglon. "I have a secret message for you, O king," said Ehud, and something in those words piqued Eglon's curiosity. Perhaps he thought Ehud had information about Israel. Perhaps he imagined some internal conspiracy that could be useful. The king, intrigued, ordered all the servants and guards to leave the room. They were alone, Eglon and Ehud, the oppressor and the liberator. And what would happen in the next few seconds would change the destiny of two nations. The room was silent, and Ehud knew there was no turning back. It was now or never. Eglon rose from his throne. Ehud approached, and then he spoke the words that sealed the fate of the king of Moab. "I have a message from God for you." In a swift and precise movement, Ehud seized the sword hidden in the right side of his body. Before Eglon could react, before he could cry for help, the blade had already served its purpose. Judges 3:22 describes the scene in striking detail. The sword went in completely, and even the hilt was covered with the king's fat. It wasn't just murder. It was an act of divine justice. For 18 years, Eglon had oppressed Israel. He had humiliated God's people. He had feasted on the suffering of others. And now, it all ended in a single blow. Ehud did not hesitate. He was not paralyzed by what he had done. With the same calm with which he had entered, he left the room, closing the doors behind him. He passed the guards without haste, without showing any sign of nervousness. Just another messenger leaving an audience with the king. The guards, realizing the doors were locked from the inside, assumed Eglon was resting. They dared not interrupt. They waited and waited. Meanwhile, Ehud was already far away, carrying out the next phase of the plan. That coup was not carried out of personal revenge. It was the fulfillment of a divine mission, and what seemed impossible had become reality. The most powerful king in the region was dead, and Israel finally had a chance to be free. Ehud knew that every second counted. He left the palace without drawing attention, walking naturally as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, his heart beat with the urgency of someone who knows that the war was only beginning. As he walked away, the guards continued waiting outside the king's chamber. Minutes passed, then a few more. The delay began to worry them. When they finally decided to break down the doors, the shock was complete. Eglon was dead, and the one responsible had already disappeared. Chaos erupted in the palace. Shouts of alarm echoed through the corridors. Soldiers rushed in all directions, searching for the assassin. But it was too late. Ehud had already crossed the border back into Israel. He was already on familiar ground. He was already ready for the next stage. Ehud's escape was no luck. It was divine strategy. Every detail had been planned. The right moment, the right weapon, the right position. God guided every step, transforming the impossible into the inevitable. Ehud not only escaped, he fled with enough time to mobilize his people. And that made all the difference, because Eglon's death was not the end of the plan. It was only the beginning. Now came the hardest part, convincing Israel, an oppressed and defeated people, to rise up and fight for freedom. Ehud arrived in the mountains of Ephraim and sounded the trumpet. The sound echoed through the valleys, summoning the Israelites. And when they gathered, they saw something they hadn't seen in years, a leader with fire in his eyes, someone who had defied the impossible and won. "Follow me," said Ehud, "for the Lord has delivered Moab, our enemy, into our hands." These were not empty words. They were the words of someone who had just experienced God's work. And the people responded. Men who had lived 18 years with their heads bowed now took up arms. Fathers who had raised children under oppression now marched toward freedom. The courage of one man had ignited the flame of hope in an entire nation. Ehud led Israel to the fords of the Jordan River, the route the Moabites would use to try to reinforce their troops or flee back home. And there, Israel took control. No one would pass. No Moabite would escape. The battle was intense, but decisive. Judges 3:29 records, "On that day Israel killed about 10,000 Moabites, all strong and valiant men. Not one escaped." The victory was complete. The people who had been humiliated for almost 2 decades were now liberators. And it all began with the courage of one man who trusted in God. Israel won. It wasn't an ordinary victory. It was a complete turnaround, impossible for any outside observer to predict. A people who had lost everything regained their land, their dignity, their identity. Moab, which seemed invincible, was defeated. Its troops were destroyed. Its king was dead. And its dominion over Israel was over forever. The oppression that lasted 18 years ended in a matter of days. News of the victory spread quickly. Every city, every village in Israel celebrated. Children who had never known freedom now ran fearlessly through the streets. Elders who had lost hope saw their prayers answered. The land that had groaned for so long under the weight of slavery now breathed a sigh of relief. But what was most impressive was not just the military victory, it was what it represented. Israel rediscovered that God had not abandoned them. That even in the darkest moments, when all seems lost, God is working behind the scenes, preparing their deliverance. And all this happened because an ordinary man decided to trust. Ehud had no army, he had no resources. He didn't have the confidence of the powerful, but he had something much more important. He had faith that God could use even his limitations to accomplish the impossible. After the victory over Moab, something extraordinary happened. Judges 3:30 records, "So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. 80 years, think about it. An entire generation grew up without knowing war. The children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of those who lived under oppression now lived in peace, all because of Ehud's courage, that left-handed man whom no one expected, who had no armies or fame, changed the destiny of Israel for almost a century. His name is forever recorded in the scriptures as one of the judges whom God raised up to save his people. Ehud was not seeking personal glory. He did not want to be remembered or celebrated. He simply answered God's call, and his response bore fruit that lasted for generations. The peace that Israel experienced did not come from diplomatic negotiations or political agreements. It came from the courage of one man who decided to act when everyone else was paralyzed by fear. It came from the faith of someone who believed that God could use even his weaknesses to accomplish great things. And that's the beauty of this story. It wasn't the perfect hero who saved Israel. It was the unlikely one, the underestimated one, the left-handed one. And that changes everything. The story of Ehud teaches us something profound about God's way of working. He doesn't choose based on human standards. He doesn't seek perfection. He seeks availability. How many times have you felt inadequate? How many times have you looked at your limitations and thought, God can't use someone like me? Ehud's story screams the opposite. God specializes in using precisely those whom the world discards. Ehud was left-handed, and this was seen as a weakness, but God transformed this weakness into the key to victory. Because what matters is not how the world sees you. What matters is how God sees you, and he sees potential where others see limitation. God doesn't need perfect heroes. He uses shepherds like David, fishermen like Peter, persecutors like Paul. He uses ordinary people who choose to trust him in extraordinary ways. And he wants to use you too. Perhaps you are going through a time of oppression. Perhaps you feel that your situation is impossible, that nothing can change. But remember, Israel was under Moabite rule for 18 years, and in a single day, God changed everything. He can do the same for you. The liberation that Ehud brought didn't begin with an army. It began with a man who decided to take a step of faith, a man who believed that God was with him, even when everything seemed impossible. And you can be that man, that woman, whom God will use to change a story. Ehud's story reminds us that God is always working even when we cannot see it, that he raises up liberators precisely when all seems lost, and that our limitations are not obstacles for God, but opportunities. So I want to ask you a question. What would you do if you knew that God could use exactly what you consider your greatest weakness? How would you act if you were certain that he is preparing you for something greater? Ehud didn't wait to be perfect. He acted with what he had, and he changed the history of a nation. You can too. Don't underestimate what God can do through someone who simply chooses to trust. If this story touched your heart, leave your comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear that God uses unlikely people for impossible missions. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next Bible stories that will strengthen your faith. And remember, when God calls, he empowers. When he sends, he accompanies. And when he promises deliverance, nothing can stop it. Just as he did with Israel through Ehud, the left-handed deliverer whom God used when the people had already lost hope. May God bless you. Until next time.